I now give the floor to Mr. Staffan de Mistura, Special Envoy of the Secretary-General for Syria.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary-General, distinguished members of the Security Council. The Secretary-General has spoken powerfully about this terrible conflict and on the need to open the road to a political talks that focus on the fundamental issues for a viable transition. He has requested me to be ready to present to the parties a draft framework of proposals as a starting point, nothing more than a starting point, but an important starting point for negotiations for a Syrian-owned, Syrian-led political transition, and we are ready. Let me offer now some few observations in this regard. We owe them to you. Firstly, the United Nations, we believe, has done its due diligence in order to understand the needs and fears of all sides, even if their own starting positions continue to be distant. Over the last 2 years, the UN has engaged extensively with Syrian stakeholders, whether in Geneva consultations or in 3 rounds of formal proximity talks, technical discussions, shuttle diplomacy in the region, and through the ISSG and the 18 special envoys from all over the world, the civil society, and frankly, very much also with the Women Advisory Board and their own representatives of Syria. I've taken into account all the inputs made in these engagements. Secondly, despite the horrors on the ground, we have been pleasantly surprised of the fact that some points of convergence have emerged from the intra-Syrian talks about what essential governing principles should frame the transition and any end-state constitutional arrangements for Syria in the future. These commonalities demonstrate how potentially close the sides' visions are, at least on the following points: an open, civil, all-inclusive, non-sectarian, pluralistic, democratic, unified state based upon the rule of law in which all components of the Syrian society are recognized, respected, and whose fundamental freedoms are enshrined and protected in a new constitution. This, at least verbally, that's what they seem to be agreeing upon. Third, in round 3 of our intra-Syrian talks, both sides have accepted that the agenda was indeed political transition. Secretary-General referred to the mediator summary a few minutes ago, which in fact have captured further commonalities on transition and set out the issues that need to be addressed for a viable transition. That summary was subsequently endorsed by the ISSG, and I'm glad that we have an ISSG. We have been waiting for that for more than a year, and it does provide to the Special Envoy a lot of support. We used to be alone before that, as the basis for the next round of intra-Syrian negotiations, which urged the parties, quote-unquote, to reach agreement on a framework for a genuine political transition, unquote. It was within this context that on the 26th of July, the ISSG requested that we develop some proposals. Mr. President, as soon as the talks resume, it is my intention to put proposals to all sides as a starting point for negotiations and as a means by which to move to direct talks, not anymore just proximity talks. The Secretary-General has been indeed encouraging me and requesting me to present a draft framework to move the sides towards a negotiation, transition through a negotiation. Fourth, any proposal that I may present would proceed upon the basis that, one, the conflict in Syria cannot be resolved militarily. We said that all the time. Sometimes we don't practice it. But only through a Syrian-owned and led political negotiating process between the government and the opposition, in which a framework is agreed based upon mutual consent, capable of effecting a genuine, irreversible, political transition leading to a new constitution and free and fair elections under international supervision while preserving the continuity. We are not looking for what happened in Libya, for instance, and reform state institutions in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2254. Fifth, in our view, any viable transition must be inevitably, one, address how power is to be exercised in practice by the transitional governance, including in relation to the presidency, executive powers, and control over government and security institutions. This is something that the Syrians have to decide, but they need to address it among them. B, involve power being shared and a phased and genuine power devolution exercised during transition in an agreed manner in accordance with good governance principles and subject to domestic and international guarantees. C, require the creation of collective transitional bodies to oversee a national ceasefire, humanitarian relief, creation of a calm, neutral environment to enable free, peaceful political activity to occur in relation to the adoption of a new constitution and the holding of free and fair elections under international supervision. I know, it looks like a dream when you look at me, Mr. President, but that's the plan. And if we don't do that, it won't be possible to actually get there. And D, be accompanied by sustained international efforts to help reconstruct Syria, and there are already discussions about how to prepare for reconstructing Syria, but as soon as genuine and verifiable transition gets underway. Therefore, ideally, Mr. President, the government would need to understand that the transition involves a genuine devolution of power and not just the absorption of the opposition into the current government, while the opposition should also understand that it needs to understand that the transition is not solely about one person or one presidency, but it is actually related to the transfer not only of power from one political group to another, but actually is about power should be exercised differently as Syria moves forward through Syrian negotiations. Above all, sides need to recognize that any transition needs to be all-inclusive, agreed among them, as the Geneva Communiqué clearly states, through mutual consent. I do take note of the inputs that we have received from both sides, the government and the opposition, in this process. And I also take note of the Higher Negotiation Committee description of his own recent vision statement as a living document, and therefore a document that can evolve. This is the kind of approach that negotiations need to have in order to be developed. I appeal, therefore, as the Secretary General did, to all of you in this Council to reflect carefully on what the Secretary General has just said. It was an important statement. It was a statement that he has made by calculating every word because he feels strongly about this terrible conflict which has been taking place during 5 years of his own tenure. I've added few points, and I hope that all Syrian parties understand that if peace is to be made, if they are to be saving their own country, there is a need for a transition, and it will require genuine readiness to negotiate and compromise and be present at the next talks. This is the opportunity we would like to offer them. Let me add and finish, because obviously we can't ignore the gorilla in the room, and let me stress that all this will and can be heavily affected if we can overcome the restoration of the 9 of September agreement between the two co-chairs, which actually gave us a lot of hope, and on the basis of which we have been working even harder in order to renew the talks. Thank you.
Thank Mr. de Mistura for the additional comments he has provided.